Everyone, in just a second, I'm going to be introducing author Michele Campbell, and her debut novel, It's Always the Husband, is so good. I can't wait to talk to her about it. It's a thriller, it's fun, it's about three girls that meet in college, and it is really a good book. And like I said, it's her debut novel. She's got another one coming out soon. We're going to be talking about that, and I can't wait. So here is Michele. Hi everyone, I am so excited today to be speaking with author Michele Campbell, and we're going to be talking about her debut novel, It's Always the Husband. Look at that cover. We're going to talk about that cover
Can
in
you
just a
see
second.
it? Thank you, Michele.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I am so excited. I was so, people were recommending this book to me because I get a lot of people on Instagram, a lot of reviewers on Instagram, which I just love, and they'll be like, read this book, and so many people were like, read this book. I'm like, okay, I'll read it, and I'll ask her to talk, and you said yes, so I'm so excited.
Well, it's just wonderful. These days with everybody on social media, I feel like word of mouth can get really amplified. And I found a lot of wonderful readers that way. And I really appreciate you putting me on your show so that more people can hear about it.
Yeah, and what I'm finding is so interesting is this book came out last May. Okay. And it's like it cycles through. You get another buzz. It's like you get buzz when it comes out. And now all of a sudden everybody's talking about it again. So, I mean, I think that's awesome for you as an author to have that, continuously happen, that somebody picks it up and then everybody on, Instagram or Facebook is like, oh my God, I want to read that too. And, so you're kind of on another wave. So it's really awesome to be able to talk to you.
It's wonderful. And also the paperback is coming out this May. And I think that'll reach a lot of more people too, because, the price point is a little better. And it is always available, of course, in ebook, where I think a lot of people like to go to find their new authors. Again, because, the hardcover is gorgeous and I love it. But it does cost more.
Yeah, but I love that. But like I said, I'll talk about that in a second. But I do want to tell everybody, I listened to this on audio also. I did back and forth. And the woman's name is January Lavoie. She did, I don't know if you listened to it, but she did.
She's amazingly talented. And, I exchanged messages with her after I listened to the audio, and I said, I didn't really know how my character sounded, but now I do, because she just had different voices. So the story is basically three college friends. They're roommates their freshman year at an Ivy League college, and they're not necessarily women who belong together in an intense friendship, but because they meet at this really vulnerable moment in their lives, they just bond incredibly strongly, and something terrible happens that leaves them with this very dark secret. And then the book picks up 20 years later and one of them is murdered. And the question is it always the husband or was it one of the best friends? And so there are three very distinct women with very different backgrounds and personalities who are at the center of the story, and then three different husbands who are also potentially all suspects. And all of the personalities were read with just such sort of vividness and gusto by January Lavoie, who's a very talented actress and does a lot of audio.
She had, and like the tension, as the tension was building, she had me like, okay, because her voice like got really tense and during the tense moments. But you know what I always suggest for readers as I'm reading more of these thrillers is that I love the way the book opens because you don't know who it is. Okay, so you're left wondering because every other chapter we know who's speaking, okay, but we don't know who that first chapter is, okay.
So the first chapter is the night of the murder of one of the three women, and you see her about to be pushed or jump off a bridge, but you don't know which woman it is. So So, and then then we go back in time 20 years to see the kind of genesis of these relationships. And it's at that point a pretty intense study of these three young women and all of their trials and tribulations. And they are all damaged in some way or striving for something. And they all, I think, are potentially viable suspects in killing one
Oh
another,
my
which
gosh.
is kind of hard to achieve, but that was the goal.
Yeah, and so you know what I did? Sometimes I do this with thrillers, and your book is one of them that I did. So I got done listening to it, and then because I knew what the first chapter was, but I went back. And I'm telling readers, do that because you will get so much from that first chapter. Because after you know everything, and we don't do spoilers, so I'm not telling anybody anything, but after you already know what happens, go back and read that first chapter because you'll have a fresh new insight, and you'll be like, oh, okay. I don't know. I'm trying to make it so that people understand without giving away a spoiler. But I do suggest that because that's how I read thrillers. Because I know how you started it, but then you get a fresh new, like, oh, okay, now I see what was going on there. So it's a compliment to you because that
Well,
means that it's such a good book that you care. You know what I mean? Like, so I think
well, that's the thing. I mean, I definitely spent a fair number of pages early on developing these relationships so that the reader would understand the characters. And also, I do think it makes the reader care about the characters and want to know not only which one died, obviously, but what were the undercurrents that led to that.
Exactly. And this book had, had you going, had me going. I mean, it's crazy good. And I kept going back because I couldn't believe it was your debut novel. I was like, I kept going back and I'm like, wait, that's the first? Okay, wait a second. That's why I had emailed you yesterday. I was like, wait, that's the first one. I was so confused because I was like, wow.
No. Well, so it's my first novel as Michele Campbell. But I actually, about 10 years ago, I wrote a procedural series. I'm a former federal prosecutor. And I wrote a procedural series that's much more like Law and Order type books. And those had kind of gone by the wayside. And so this is a very different endeavor. It's my debut as a suspense novelist. And I feel like it's much more character driven and much more fun to write rather than just kind of planting the clues. Not that I liked the books I wrote before and they're fun and you can still find them out there. They were written as Michelle Martinez, and they feature a federal prosecutor in New York, and they're very much like solve the crime type thing. So,
right. Well, I'm loving, I've talked to a bunch of you women thriller writers, and I'm loving it. It's like this whole new genre for me. Because you guys write these they're like relationship thrillers is what I want to say because their relationships are so entangled, and that's what we find with these three women. Like, you just don't know because their relationships for 20 years are so, like you said, it could have been any one of them, and then their husbands and boyfriends, and it's just it's crazy good.
Yes, well, so this is what I've seen it called, like domestic suspense and domestic noir, domestic thrillers. like basically your home life is really messed up, and that's the genesis of the crime. And I think the reason that people relate to it, or at least I know the reason that I relate to it, is that we all have these very intense personal relationships, and the question of whether any of us ourselves could ever get to the point of killing somebody out of rage, out of betrayal or disappointment, I think interests everybody. In some ways, to me, it's more gripping than the idea of a serial killer who's just kind of like a psychopath out of left field. Like, could your best friend really turn on you to that extent? Could your husband betray you, or could you betray him? And could that lead to such passionate feelings that you would resort to violence? And sort of like the darkness that lurks in every heart, I think is very interesting topic for fiction.
Oh, so, absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. And, I switched on characters. I'd be like, okay, Aubrey's my favorite character. And then I'd be like, no, Jenny. And I love that you do that because you don't want to become too attached. It was like, as soon as I was like, well, Kate's just snobby, so I don't really like her. And then all of a sudden you show Kate's vulnerable side. And it's like, oh, okay, you're right. I should like Kate. And then, it's like you go back and forth.
Thank you for seeing that, because I did try to give each woman enough darkness that she was a viable suspect, but keep her relatable enough that at times she could really generate sympathy in the reader. And I think that's a tough balance. I've definitely had the criticism that people didn't find the characters likable. And I guess in my view, first of all, I love all the characters because I wrote them all, but I
Right.
mean, I find them all to be understandable. And they each have sources of either damage or insecurity in their lives that are really just driving them on and really motivating their actions toward each other. And so I think it's wonderful that you saw that because it's really important to me that each character have her voice and that the
Oh
reader
yeah.
kind of get inside her head.
Oh yeah, yeah. I loved going back and then even doing the time jumping and seeing what their relationship is 20 years from that. I love that. I mean, I found it. You know, it didn't confuse me, and it didn't because a lot of times people will say, "Well, it's too confusing." That I thought it was seamless. I mean, I really, even listening to it, which a lot of times when you're doing time hops, listening is hard. But
That's right. And I can't recall whether when she reads it, she will read the timing cues because there are
she
times where
does.
I'll say like 20 years later or
Yeah, she
whatever.
does.
But I don't really do a lot of jumping back and forth.
No,
It's basically in two parts so
right.
that, the reader's grounded with this is the
Yes.
girls in their college years and this is when they're, women married, two of them have families, they have careers, and, they reunite back in their college town under somewhat difficult circumstances, at least for Kate. And
Yes.
then the deep, dark secret from the past is in danger of coming out. And that's what leads to sort of all of the new kind of difficulty and betrayal that's going on in their relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of times I'll read books that they time hop too much, like every chapter, and you're like, wait, where are we? But yeah,
Right.
it's not like that at all. So like I said,
Yeah, I do think it's important to keep the reader oriented, and also, I have multiple viewpoints, so each of the women gets
yes,
her own chapters.
yes,
One of the husbands gets his own chapters, and then there's a police officer who's trying to solve the murder.
yep,
And he's kind of an important character because he becomes really obsessed with the victim in almost a romantic
right,
way. He's actually had a previous encounter with her where he met her when she was alive. And so, because of that, he becomes more of a player than just a kind of hands off, removed police officer might otherwise be, and is kind of entangled in what was going on.
yeah. I felt a lot of sympathy for him. I really enjoyed his character. I enjoyed that you brought him in. Like when you brought him in, I was like, oh, it was a nice twist and
Right.
another added element to it. So I really
Well,
enjoyed that.
and as somebody with a law enforcement background, it's sort of tempting to me to delve into that aspect maybe
Right,
more than you normally see in a thriller.
right,
Like most thrillers, the cops are non-entities, and they're just maybe there's some. Maybe people are worried about the police or going to the police or whatever, but they're usually not major characters because it's very focused on the victim and the killer and the relationships. Um, in my next book, which is coming out next July,
yes,
there is also a police officer character, a woman, although she does not get her own point of view, and she is a little bit more of a side character. But here, I felt like, uh, there really is a phenomenon of male police officers and either female murder victims or child victims, where they'll get this sort of sense of like almost rescuer or like
yeah,
they just have a very personal need to solve the crime, and so that's what was going on with Chief Rizzo in this book, that it became so important to him to find the killer that perhaps he wasn't always observing the rules or doing what he should do.
right. I know, and I kind of was like, I saw that you could pre-order it on Amazon already, which is just
The new book,
yeah, the
yes.
new book, which is just crazy to me because it seems like they're getting earlier and earlier those pre-orders, and that's why I was like begging you. I'm like, please can I read this next one? And but
I will. I'll try to arrange that for you, but it's still in process.
yeah,
It's still in early days because it's not coming out until July 31st. But it's called "She Was the Quiet One," and it's about two sisters. at a boarding school, and there's a big scandal that unfolds. One of the sisters is getting way too close to a male teacher. The sisters have this intense rivalry with each other, and then one of the sisters is murdered. And it's about, was it her sister? Was it any number of other people at the school who had grudges and who were involved in this hazing incident that led to this huge scandal? Did it have something to do with her relationship with this teacher? His wife is a big character. So there are many different suspects in the book. And again, it's very character driven. It's sort of very intense, closed world that these sisters are in together at this boarding school. And so I think people who liked It's Always the Husband will love this book.
Yeah, what I couldn't believe is how great your covers are. Because I know you probably don't have the new cover, but it's up on Amazon for everybody to look at. But those covers are so unique. How did you get, like, did you have a say in those, or did does the publishing company?
Oh, they're done by the publishing house, and they were shown to me, and I love them too. So I was just like, yes, that is so beautiful. But yeah, this kind of, it's sort of becoming a signature of my books with this sort of silhouette of the faces on the cover.
I know,
it's very haunting.
Yeah, show it again for some people, because I want them to see, because when you first look at it, back it up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. See that silhouette?
So you see, there's a bridge.
Yeah.
The silhouette of a bridge and a woman's face. So the bridge is where the victim jumps off of or is pushed, and that sort of becomes a question. Did she jump? Was she pushed? So it's very beautifully in there. And then you see the face of the woman who presumably is the woman who died, Although
and then when I saw the other cover is like, it's different. It's like an orange. It's not purple, but it has the same kind of a silhouette. And then
it has the two sisters' faces on either side with the dormitory, like the building in the middle. So you kind of get this, it's almost a Gothic feeling at this boarding school of like, it's a little bit scary there. And it's, in the far north, it's always dark and cold, and we've got, some nasty things going on. So,
well, I think, you should thank your publishing company, because, when covers like that, when you see that they're, that I have to look at a book and I'm like, oh, that's Michele Campbell book, because I can just tell by the cover.
They're trying to kind of carry it through, and I just think they're very talented and creative with the work they do, the artwork they do. So, yes, I'm very fortunate.
Yeah. And I was back in my former life before I raised kids, I was a legal secretary. So I always like when I talk to lawyers, because I spent a lot of my years with lawyers. And I always thought that when I'd be done raising kids, I'd go back and be a legal secretary. But guess what? There's no such thing anymore.
That's terrible. My mom was actually a legal secretary, and that's how I got interested in law.
Oh, really? Yeah, they're just, what I used to do, there just isn't, paralegals do now. And, it's just kind of interesting to me. But being a lawyer for all those years, how do you think that helped you with writing these suspense? Because I see it, okay, just because I'm a little bit familiar with it, and I can see the writing style and everything like that. But do you feel that way? Do you feel like it's really
Absolutely. It helped me in so many ways. First of all, as a lawyer, you have to write all the time, and you have to be on deadline. So just having to produce pages, whether it's a brief or a motion paper or whatever, I think sets you up in the mode of, I'm going to sit down at my computer every day and work on my book. Because being an author is very self-motivated, unlike being a lawyer where you have judges who are going to yell at you if you're late with something. Of course, my editor would yell at me if I'm late with my book, but she doesn't know that until the end. There's no real day-to-day supervision. Yeah. You have to be accountable to yourself. And I think, having spent a number of years being on time really has helped me just have the discipline to be a writer and force myself to do the work, even if it's a beautiful day out, or, if something's going on in my life where I have other obligations, but I still have to get the work done. So there's that. I also feel that in writing suspense, it's extremely helpful to have a grounding in the criminal justice system, because I was a criminal lawyer. So I just kind of know the parameters of what's realistic and what's not. And if somebody's murdered, I know a little bit about forensic science,
Right.
about, how would they seek the evidence, and so because a lot of building a thriller is also planting clues and red herrings.
Yes.
So you kind of need to know what's important and what's not. And I feel like my legal background makes that very simple for me, whereas for someone else, they might have to do a ton of research to have the same result.
Yeah, and what I think, this is just my perspective, and maybe because I do know what it's like in the legal world, is that women and men, because there's a lot of male lawyers out there that are writing too, is that the book is tight because you're
Mm.
used to writing very tight. When you're writing briefs and everything else that you're filing, you can't have a lot of words that don't matter. So
Yeah,
I always find that they're very tight books, and there's not a lot of skip, like people, that like me who read all the time. I can like skip pages and be like, I know
right.
exactly. But when I can almost tell it's a lawyer when that book is tight and there's not a paragraph wasted.
Well, thank you. Well, that's a great compliment. And, that's also partly having um, the kind of background to do lots of revisions, which is also true of a lawyer.
Right.
Like, you can't just write something and expect it to work. I mean, I would say if I handed in 400 manuscript pages ultimately for this book, I probably wrote 1,500 or 2,000 to get to that. And there's just a lot of wrong turns and whole characters that fall away. And I also work with an amazing editor at my publishing house who is extremely talented at being able to put her finger on what's working, what's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have to be able to take criticism and respond to it. And there were times when I was very attached to a scene and it was hard to let it go. There was one scene in particular, and I don't think this spoils anything to talk about this. There's a moment when Aubrey's mother dies,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a very involved scene where Jenny and Aubrey's sister go to scatter her mother's ashes, and it was all character development, and it was really quite an emotional scene. And I spent a lot of time on it, and I felt like it did say things about Aubrey and Jenny and Aubrey's relationship with her family and with Jenny's relationship with Aubrey. But my editor really felt like it slowed down the plot. And that was like the only time I really resisted. But ultimately, I saw that she was right and that this was, like it's more important to keep the reader going with what's happening than to sort of have ultimate character development. That's not like I felt like the characters ended up being very well developed, and this was just kind of too much icing on the cake.
Right. Right. And I can see that it would be hard, but I'm sure that you're a little thick skinned about it because you have gone through so many edits. I mean, there's nothing like edits on a legal document that.
No, it's really true. And in fact, I've at times it's reminded me of when I was a young associate in a law firm, and I was writing a brief about insurance law, which is like the driest subject you can imagine, working with a very elderly partner who had had a very distinguished career. He's since passed away, but he knew what he was doing. He made me do, it must have been 30 drafts of a 10-page brief. And it was so maddening. I really hated it at the time. And it took me a long time to realize that he was teaching me. And he was teaching me how to write. And, that you have to strive for that, as you said, really tight delivery of the facts and the language being precise. And I do feel like I write very clearly. Like, what's going on in my books. And it's not a lot of confusion. So, and yet it's suspenseful and you don't know who the killer is. But you always are anchored in time and place and who the character that's speaking and all of that.
Absolutely. And I am so happy that I got to talk to you. I cannot wait to read your next book, okay? So as soon as you have it, please send it to me and we can talk about it and get it out there when, we'll put the video out when the book comes out. And
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna email you after we hang up so we can arrange for all of that.
Yeah,
so thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, thank you so much.
It's been wonderful.
Yes, and everybody, I will have her links underneath here. And if you don't have time to read the book and you are an audiobook person, I highly suggest listening to this book. You will get just as much out of it. And we will be chatting, Michele. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's
Okay.
wonderful to talk to you,
Have a
Michelle.
great
Bye-bye.
day. Bye-bye. Well, that was so much fun talking to Michele. I love that. I cannot wait to read her next book. I'm so happy that I'm going to get to that and to do that and get to talk to her again because I loved her book. And that I can't wait to see the next one if that was her debut thriller. I mean, it's going to be crazy. So anyway, she was so sweet, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please hit like, and if you'd like to get notifications of all my future videos, hit subscribe, and we'll see everyone later. Thanks.